In this video, I'm going to talk all about net sheets. Now, why is a net sheet important? Well, it's important because it shows the potential money that could be going into your pocket if you sell your house. So let's get into it. A net sheet, also known as the seller's net sheet, is a document that is prepared by a listing agent and then given to the seller. It breaks down how much money a seller can expect to make from the sale of their home. So at the very simple level, all it is the purchase price or the potential purchase price minus any outstanding mortgage payoff and minus the closing costs. What you have left is the seller's net proceeds. And keep in mind, this is an estimate. Now, it's interesting to note that if you don't subtract the costs of selling, then you're essentially calculating the equity in your house. The equity is the fair market price of the house minus the mortgage payoff. So it costs to sell a house. What the net sheet does is it gives you an estimate of what you can expect to net if you sell your house. So the first time you'll see a net sheet is most likely at the listing presentation with a realtor. This is when you're first deciding to sell and you want to get a ballpark sense of how much you'll net based on the asking price. And if you're still deciding how much to ask, a net sheet can really help you get a sense of exactly how the numbers change if the asking price changes. So here's how I make a net sheet. This is not an official document. The net sheet is a reference. Okay, so in this net sheet, I've created 3 columns for 3 different scenarios. I have a low asking price, a mid-range asking price, and a high asking price. The likeliest price range will be the column in the middle, but the other 2 columns help us understand the extreme scenarios, especially the first column. The first column is the very minimum price we're willing to accept. And when you look at the estimated net proceeds for the first column at the bottom, the question is, can you live with that number? And I think by asking that question, we can really start to understand how to approach the sale. But think of the low asking price and the high asking price columns. Think of them as guardrails. What we're really focusing on is that middle column. Okay, before I move on, I just want to mention that throughout the selling process, you'll probably see more than one net sheet. So here's a timeline of the process. First is the listing presentation, where we're deciding what the asking price is going to be. You'll have a net sheet with different scenarios. Then, once the house is on the market, offers will start coming in at different prices, which means your realtor should be making a net sheet for every offer, and that will help you as the seller to see the big picture. Then, once an offer is accepted, then we know what the purchase price is. It's no longer a variable. And we'll also know a number of other variables. So at this point, the net sheet will look a lot more comprehensive. So again, you'll probably see a few different net sheets throughout the timeline of the transaction. And as you get closer to closing day, the estimates will become more and more refined. And at the very end of the transaction, at the closing table, the seller will receive the closing statement, which is the official document that shows the exact net proceeds. Okay, so what's on the net sheet? So like I said, at the top is the purchase price, and everything following are subtractions from the purchase price. So the biggest subtraction is the mortgage payoff. How much do you owe on the house? Are there any outstanding liens? Or maybe there's a second mortgage. And the seller will volunteer that information to their realtor in order for them to make the initial net sheet. But if you are selling, you'll at some point need to request a payoff letter from your lender. The letter will outline not just the remaining balance, but also any interest you owe as well as any fees. So for the initial net sheet, we can just put in a nice cushion of, say, $500 for any fees. You're asking, what fees? Well, In order to say goodbye to your mortgage, you'll have to pay fees, including a reconveyance fee, which essentially clears the title from the lender. And now, moving down to selling costs, there's a number of items in this section, but they don't all necessarily apply at this point. Remember, we're working on the initial net sheet. We don't have those numbers yet. So I put some items here just so you can see some of the potential costs. That way there won't be any surprises along the way. Okay, so let's briefly go down one by one. I put taxes first because the transfer taxes are the easiest to calculate. When you sell a house, you pay transfer taxes, and you can look up the transfer tax rates online. They do change depending on where you are, and for this specific example, we're in the city of Los Angeles. So I'll put a transfer tax calculator link in the description. So in LA County, it's 55 cents per every $500 of the purchase price. And in the city of LA, it's $2.25 per every $500 of the purchase price. And remember, we're filling out the 3 columns for the 3 different scenarios. So we have the low asking price, the mid asking price, and the high asking price. So we're just calculating the tax for each scenario. Then there's property tax prorations. What's that? So twice a year you pay property taxes. And when you sell a house, you're no longer responsible for those taxes. So depending on what day of the year you sell your house, there are 2 possible scenarios. Either you've already paid your property taxes, or you might still owe your property taxes. And when the buyer takes ownership, the buyer becomes responsible for the property tax. So the property tax will be prorated depending on what day of the year the sale lands on. So this item might actually turn out to be a credit if you've already paid your taxes. So that would mean the taxes are paid for stretching beyond the closing date. But if you haven't paid yet, then you'll have to pay your portion up until the closing date. And again, at this stage, for the initial net sheet, it's way too early to start calculating the prorations, but the line item is there, so we're conscious of it. Okay, next is title and escrow. For the most part, title and escrow can be calculated fairly easily. So title and escrow fees are based off the purchase price. And title companies usually have a fee calculator on their website. I'll put a link in the description. So all I did here is I went to a title company website and I typed in the sale price for the 3 different scenarios, and it told me what the fee would be. And the fees are mostly the same across different companies. Now, keep in mind that in Southern California, the seller typically pays the title fee. And for the escrow fee, the buyer and the seller typically split that 50-50. Okay, next is Realtor commissions. This is usually a percentage of the purchase price. So in this example, I have 2% for the listing agent and 2% for the buyer's agent. And remember, the seller is typically the one that pays the entire amount. So in this example, it would be 4% total commission. And the commission can be negotiated. It's not set in stone. Next, I have repair work. As far as repair work goes, you might want to put in a cushion of, say, a couple $1,000s to do some work before you list your house. It doesn't hurt. I know once you decide to list, all these little things start jumping out at you, but some sellers don't want to do any work, which is fine. But you might want to put a cushion just in case. Now, as far as seller concessions, we won't know what that figure is yet. Seller concessions is any money that's paid to the buyer to help them with closing costs. So I have this line item here just so we know how any changes to it would affect our bottom line. See, we're always keeping an eye on our bottom line. And for the higher purchase price scenario, maybe you want to throw in some negotiating sweeteners, so to speak. So you can estimate a nice negotiating cushion in this line item. But again, at this point, I wouldn't worry too much about seller concessions. That will be filled in at some point when it goes to contract. Okay, next we have our termite report. Let's say that's about $200. And next we have our state mandated natural hazard disclosure report. That's about $100. And if you're part of an HOA, you'll have to pay some HOA transfer fees and possibly some HOA prorations. Okay, so that brings us to our estimated net proceeds here at the bottom. And remember, net proceeds is the money that goes in your pocket. That's your money. That's the amount that you walk away with on closing day. So those are the major items on a net sheet, especially at the beginning. And once you do have a signed contract, the net sheet will start looking a lot more comprehensive. In fact, the California Realtors Association provides a form that you could use. It looks like this. It's not required. There's a lot of stuff here, but once you do have all the variables, you can start filling it out here, and it'll give you a pretty good sense of what to expect. So like right here, you can even fill out the daily interest rate on your loan up until closing day. So it gets really specific. And again, the closer you get to closing, the more refined the estimates are going to become. And then when you actually do get to closing day, you will get the seller's closing statement with the exact net proceeds. Fun stuff. So that's what a net sheet looks like. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I'll see you in the next video.